Okay. So, Hunter, you and I have visited several times. We're both from the school community. You do a lot of different creative. I've listened to some of your things, a lot of creative ways for real estate. And then I'm doing the build to rent model. And you and I visited, oh, it was what, about a month ago on the phone. And you were asking some good questions. So I asked you if you'd come on and just repeat some of those questions. Maybe you have a few more. You sent some to me in email, and I thought it would be beneficial to answer them with with both of our channels and maybe
Yeah.
have some good discussion. So let's get started there.
Yeah. Well, Brandon, hey, first and foremost, thanks for taking time just to, talk with me here through the new build, build to rent stuff. It's kind of been an interest of mine for, gosh, I don't know, maybe the last year. I have a friend in town who's done kind of a similar model, and he seems to do well from it. And I'm always trying to be creative, as you mentioned, trying to find ways to figure out how to bring, $5,000 to close the deal, as my down payment. So,
Right.
I think some of those things can be accomplished in this model. So I'm really excited just to kind of talk with you, obviously pick your brain a little bit more, but then, just talk through the whole concept and, yeah, it'll be
So
great.
mention your channel too, so that everybody has that.
Yeah, so it's just my name, Hunter Gore, on YouTube. Type it in. I think I kind of labeled myself for a little bit as the tech-enabled agent. I was kind of going back through because I've had my channel for about 4 or 5 years, and I kind of did a rebrand not too long ago.
Gotcha.
So kind of in the middle of that, but we're now kind of shifting over to focus on the investor side. But a lot of great content, creative stuff. Kind of sharing what I'm doing as well.
Yeah, and I'm probably the other side of it. I'm very traditional financing with banks. And then when I go to the permanent side, it's just a traditional mortgage, what everybody understands. And yours is a little different, but you had a lot of questions kind of on the startups and kind of through the process. Let me read a couple of them and then
Sure.
we can go kind of build from there. What is your optimal price per lot as a ratio to the overall? I use ACV, after construction value, and just sharing it from there. So that's a great question. I don't know necessarily if I'm going to give it but I'm not solid if it's a proportion. I'm trying to keep mine at around $15,000 per door. That is my ultimate metric. Because I've built several, I've built from a fourplex to a triplex to a bunch of single families. I've had a duplex. I've gotten several of those. If I can hold it at $15,000 per door, and that's with utilities so far, the way I've been doing it, my ultimate build cost on that, if I'm building it at, it's coming out to $135 a square foot on this latest build. I've gotten it a little lower when I'm building in scale over several of them, but these latest single families, I've been able to build them at about 135. And so it comes out about 7% of my total construction is the dirt. And I'm trying to keep it, of course, as low as you can.
Yeah, that's great. Um, Yeah, 7%. So I feel like for, if somebody's in, the Boston market, they're in a suburb of Boston trying to, do something up there, that their price per land is going to differ than your price in Texas and my
And it
price in
will.
South Carolina. So I think having maybe a ratio is something good to look for.
And that
You know,
is
'cause,
because you're also looking at, and I was working on this yesterday on a video that's coming out. Um, is how to underwrite it. And I've shared that I'm looking at, okay, if I build it at this square footage, and that's one of your questions, we'll get into it. I can get, I'll just use the example, 2150 a month. Can I build it for less than 215,000 dollars? I'm kind of using that 1% rule backing into it and underwriting. If I can build it for less than the 1% rule, that or better, I know the other side of it, I can make money.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. Could you maybe talk through the 1% rule a little more just in case,
Sure.
somebody might not be familiar with that?
So the 1% rule is taking the rents and your either your purchase price or your construction price, that amount of rent represents 1% of the entire purchase price of the property. So that would be that 1%.
Yeah, so I know when you and I talked last month, speaking a little bit about the 1% rule, like you're building this for 215, 210, 215, but that's not what it's worth. It's worth significantly more than that,
Right.
correct?
Yes. So it's what most of these properties I've been able to build, if not every one, I'm trying to think through everything. I've had instant equity of about of 20%. There's been a
Hmm.
few that are around 22%. So it's right there in that range, but most of them have been at that 20% or just a tiny bit better. So you're starting out with equity. And then on the other side of it, when you go to the permanent financing side, on permanent finance, traditional financing, the best rates are at 75% loan to value. So if I
Hmm.
chose, I would only have to put in 5%. Now, you and me, we're at different ages. I'm in my 50s. You're much younger than me. I'm looking at, and if I were your age, younger, maybe another decade, even younger, in the early 40s, I probably would only do 5% if I did every one, and I could build more and only have 5% down. Um, I'm right now, because I'm getting closer to retirement, I'm wanting to start at a higher cash flow per door from the very beginning. So this latest one, I'm putting in about 12% into it, 25,000 down on the project. It's going to end up costing close to 215 the loan, and that's 215 including I already allocate money for the 30 year. I know I that's separate, but I
Hmm.
included in getting to 215 allocates the closing cost for it. So I'm putting the loan is at 185,000. So I'm putting a little bit down, and then I even this latest one I bought down the rate. I bought the dip yesterday.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if you
Oh,
knew the rates went down yesterday and I bought the dip.
well, it's kind of funny you mentioned that because I just completed well, I'm signing paperwork this afternoon, but I just completed it yesterday, a cash out refi of one of my properties. So I understand a little bit what you mean.
Yeah, so
By
rates went down.
buying
There
the
was a
dip.
big, if you want to call a little bit of a black swan event that caused rates to dip about a quarter point. And I was getting prepped to kind of lock in that rate because we're expecting to close on this single family the end of February. And so I bought that moment because I was looking at it all this week, and I have a great broker that I use that's I call him a savant. He really is. I've been working with him for more than a decade, and I've sent him because I was in real estate myself. I don't know, Hunter, hadn't talked much about that. I had a real estate team, and when I sold it last year, I'd finished up selling over 1,800 homes, almost a $500 million in real estate over the
Wow.
last 11 years. And so I sold that, but I sent him all of my mortgages with anybody that asked me. So I sent him hundreds, but it's because I trust him. He is a really good, and we were looking at the market and we were seeing a flight from stocks to bonds, which was causing the interest rate to come down. He and I have been looking at it for the last 3 or 4 days. And then yesterday we had that other event, and that created a flight also. So we bought that dip yesterday to lock in the rate. But
Hmm.
that's some other topics. But you asked, do you like to build smaller homes to try for a higher square footage? I
Brandon, but sorry to cut you off. Before you answer that, I want to put a little kind of preference, on that question, kind of where my mindset's coming from.
Sure.
So I have a lot under contract, which we'll talk about that here later on. But in that area, they have bigger homes that are kind of selling for like an average price per square foot. And the thought process for me is like, well, hey, can I build something smaller and maybe get a similar overall sales price, but it's a higher price per foot? So that then, if I have another lot maybe right beside it, so to speak, can I now build a larger floor plan, use the same one as a comp, and anyway, so that's kind of where I'm coming from on my question a
Gotcha.
little bit.
It's a good question. So what I would say in my history of looking at real estate, if I'm taking, let's just use a subdivision as an example. So I'm taking a subdivision and I'm looking at the median price of the sales price, and I'm also looking at median square footage. I'm using both of those data points to make a decision. Because what I've seen over the years is if I'll just use an example. So the median 1,700 square feet, if I'm going to build 2,500 square feet, I will be pulled down. I call it almost like a magnet. I'm going to be pulled down by the median is pulling down the value and pulling down the average price per square foot. The median is going to get right there where the median is. So if you were to build it at 1,700, you could expect, say it was 200. Let's just say you $200 a square foot, you're going to probably get 200 a square foot. If you're building at 2,500 square foot house, most likely it's going to be less than $200 a square foot. It's getting pulled down in value by the median. On the flip side of that, I'm using that data for my advantage. I want to build a little bit less than the median, and it, like a magnet, is getting pulled up in value. And I'm gaining value exceptionally because I'm building lower. Because the example I'm using, I'm building these houses, they're 1,350 to 1,400 square foot when the median's real close to 1,700. It's getting pulled up, kind of like doing a renovation, a burr. It's getting pulled up in value over and above the cost. So I am using that data specifically for that. So I look to always build below the median because I know above the median, my value is getting pulled down. That's
Yeah, that's great. And I'm taking tons of notes as we're talking, by
but that's
by the way.
that's my 10. So my background, I was in commercial banking, and when we had appraisals, and I think through these years, this was now commercial banking was now, man, 15 years ago. So I still remember pieces of it, but it's been a while. But I was the one critiquing appraisals. The things that I learned in banking, I have used and made dividends from it for the rest of my life. And I was the one having to critique the appraisals, even being a check on appraisers, making sure they were using appropriate comps, that they were back into the values correctly. And so then I went into real estate, and my whole goal as a listing agent is supposed to be your most professional agent. They are the people setting the market. They should know the values the best. And so when I was looking at it and measuring myself is how accurate could I be on list price to sales price? Because if we got it right, the property was going to move faster at the highest price possible. If we overpriced it, we're chasing the market down. If we're underpricing it, I used to say there is a chance it could get bid back up. No, you don't want to do that very often, but I was trying to hit where market was for the property. And so I was using all my background from critiquing appraisals to just real estate as I saw when you're seeing 1,800 transactions, you're really seeing some good macro trends. And if we were ever off, I would go back and study. We listed it at this, it ended up selling at this. What did I miss? And it helped me get better and better at as an investor. I think our secret, one of the secret sauces is we know value of real estate. You have to master knowing the value, and that's where the success is.
Yeah,
Thoughts?
I love that. No, it's spot on. We have to know value, whether you're doing build to rent or creative finance. You have to know, what the value is. Are you paying retail? Are you overpaying? Are you getting a deal? Can you, in your case, get creative? Can you build a smaller, 1,300 square foot home that's going to get pulled up in value, simply because the median, is at a higher, price overall, so you can get a little bit more per square foot for yours, which I think is beautiful.
I did that
Great, great,
also.
great way to do that.
We had a triplex. Well, I was working with the city. There's another story to this. So we're working with the city. The ultimate goal is to get as many doors on a piece of dirt as you can. That's where you're maximizing your revenue for the square footage of dirt. So that's what my perspective is to maximize the number of doors on the lot. Now, most lots, single family lots are single family lots. But if you've got something zoned multifamily, how many doors will the governing entity allow? And so I started out with a floor plan of a fiveplex and based off of the offsets from the sides and the back and the front and the parking that I had to build, I couldn't get 5 units on the property. So we started looking at four and saying, can we fit 4 units? And we couldn't get the 4 units on there. And so I went back to the city and said, okay, I'm going to do 3 units and I'm going to build these storage units to the side because it was only 10 foot width. I used the common wall on one side. So that saved me a little bit of cost. And all I had to do was finish the other 3 walls. And I built 5 10 by 10 storage units. And of course, the city sat there, and I remember watching the expression of them. And I know what they were trying to do. They were trying to figure out how to tell me no. And they sat there and they couldn't figure out a way to tell me no. And they said, "Well, who are you allowing to use this? Are you?" Because they were going to say, if you're marketing this to the public, they were going to try to figure out a way to say no. And I said, "No, I'm offering these to renters." Of course, I am. I'm offering these to renters. But I
Uh,
had 2 multifamily units beside me, and I also did think it's a value. If they have extra stuff there, they're going to stay longer. The more junk and crap you have, you don't want to move. But also, it's a value. If they had a kind of like a storage locker, they had a place outside of their living quarters. They have a place to put storage in, and it's literally right around the corner of the building, and they're easy access to it. I have another fourplex beside it. I'm renting one of the units to them, but I was able to creatively get more revenue per for that lot. I couldn't
hmm,
get another rentable unit, but I got 5 rentable units, and it equaled. They're only here in Texas. I was only able to get $55 per 10 by 10 storage unit, but that's another was that $275 a month in cash flow to that property instead of not using it completely. So you got to be
yeah.
creative sometimes.
And right there, you're able to add additional income, which, boosts the value of the property. And now if you ever wanted to sell it down the road, now it has more income than just a normal duplex or triplex that might even be sitting right beside it.
It created value, and I looked at the cost at that time when I built this. We worked on this project in 22, started the project in 22. So it was right at $20,000, including everything, the door, the roll up doors, everything. So I was backing into it. I was like, okay, it's still better than the 1% rule. It's costing me 20 grand, and it ended up, I think it finished up at 18, but I'm getting 275,000 $275 in revenue on $18,000.
Hmm. Yeah,
Math works.
that's beautiful. I
So
love
what other
that. Yeah,
questions,
no
Hunter,
better way to do it.
would you have? Sorry, my mouth is dry.
Yeah, hey, all good. Let me take a look real quick just to see what other ones were on the list. Because I know that there were a lot of stuff that we
You
talked
asked a
through.
lot of some banking stuff too.
I did. So what's kind of interesting for, some of the projects I'm looking at, and this is stuff that I don't think I've updated you yet, but one, I found a partner who was going to provide all the capital. Um, in this specific instance, they were going to go raise it, but they were still willing to provide it at a really low, I say low, I think it's going to be 8 or 10% interest rate. But it's probably going to be just as expensive as bank debt, but we could borrow 100% of the funds at this point, and they're a private person, so it's a little more flexible,
Yeah, if you
which
can
is which
get
is kind of
close
unique.
to eight, that is banking market right now. 8 to 8.5 is typical banking rates right now. So that's a pretty good option.
Yeah, yeah. I do know that I had some questions around, kind of financing it, coming out the other side. So, you know, typically if somebody's going to work with a bank or a private lender, somebody who can at least give them a short-term construction loan, because I feel like those might be a little easier potentially to come across, especially if you find a hard money lender. But
Right.
what does that process look like if I just finished my 1,300 square foot house, I've got my certificate of occupancy, how do I go about getting that cash back out of it? What's that best route for a refinance?
So if you're building it and you're saying doing a traditional 30 year,
Yeah, so something that's traditional, not, some quick problem, solver like another hard money loan. Like I'm looking for something that's more of a conventional
okay, so
product, maybe a DSCR type product, but something that's going to be a 30-year fixed.
yeah, DSCR from what I've heard, and I'm not as familiar on DSCR maybe as you are. I don't know if they're doing any 90% loan to value right now. I haven't heard about it. The one that I talked to where the rates get better is at 75%, which is the same thing on a traditional mortgage. You can get 80% loan to value, but it's going to be a higher interest rate. You get to 75 is where best practice rates are. So I'm trying to stay at that 75%. It's just for me, I've not been able to get cash out over and above the build because it's only appraising at about 80% on the the loan to value.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, so typically when you're doing those, and you're getting that 80%, there, how much money are you typically leaving in the build? And you may have mentioned it earlier, but I don't know if I wrote that
Sure.
down
No,
specifically.
the first one I did that we finished up last summer, I left $8,000 total. That's not bad.
Wow,
And
that's really not bad.
so, you know, the loan on that was 196. I left 8,000 in it and it appraised at two at that day. I think it was 267, 268, if I remember right, was the appraisal on it. This
Wow.
one here, I'm going to do a little different. I'm going to be at a loan of 185. So I'm leaving 25,000 in it and then I'm buying down some points.
But still, if somebody has, 20, 30,000 to do a deal, because that's what I run into a lot. Like I talk to people about creative finance and they say, "Oh, well, I don't have money for a down payment." It's like, well, you need something, but you don't need 50 grand or 100 grand. There's
And
there's
that's what I'm
creative
thinking.
things under 50.
Yeah, 20 to 30,000 I think is kind of where a lot of people are. And if you said, "Hey, I'll give you a bunch of properties with 20% equity and you end up with a 75% loan to value with 30,000 in it," I bet we could get a lot of people interested.
Oh yeah, especially something that's new construction, and really, I think part of what's drawing me to new construction on the property management side, um, is that there's not a whole lot of maintenance. I'm going through a real difficult uh, renovation on a property. We had a tenant move out, some things happened, and it started to creep up very quickly on how expensive that turn was getting. But if it's new construction, you're maybe repainting some walls, but you're not having to redo a foundation or completely redo a whole apartment or anything like that. It's very simple, I should say.
Yeah, and I would say even in context, our first one we finished. was 2021. So now we're pushing 4 years this summer. We still don't have many repairs at all.
Hmm,
I bet you we've, it's 4 units. So you've got 4 sets of appliances, you've got lots of things. We had one dishwasher washer go out. So, that's $500. We've had a few little minor repairs. If we've spent, man, I'm trying to be right and give people good counsel, but maybe $1,500 total in three and a half years of repairs and with turnover and everything. I think about turnover, that's a little bit different, but that's make ready type stuff.
sure.
If I have $2,500 total for 3.5 years of anything to fix on the property from turnovers and repairs, that's about it.
Yeah, and that's really low. I mean, I'm just thinking about some of my own properties, that are in the Midwest, which are, not only cheaper properties, but it's normally a little less on the labor and material costs. But it's, man, 2,500 bucks. I spent that almost in 1 month on a 4 unit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
that's,
that's crazy.
if we think best practice, and I've heard it from Coach Carson, I've heard it from Dion, they say you want to allocate the 15%. And what that is basically is 5% repairs, 5% for CapEx, and 5% for vacancy. That's been best practice. And I think Coach Carson recently said that over his years, he was looking backwards. And I think he's been in it for close to 2 decades now, or 15 years, or something like that. He says it came out, it equated to all his properties at about the 15% total. So I thought that was good validating information, and Dion too. I said, well, here's what I'm doing on the new construction. And I'm starting out because repairs, CapEx, I don't need that for years. Typical on any property, you start getting into repairs, heavier repairs, and CapEx starting at about year 8 is when it really begins. So I'm starting at 8%. I'm saving 8% from the beginning. And every 2 years, I'm adding a percent so that in 8 to 10 years, I'll be at that 15%. But what I've seen so far is I'm starting out at the 8%. Well, that money's not getting used at all, hardly at all. It's building up. So I'm going to have great reserves at the 8 year mark. How much will I, if I'm that much far ahead, how much further do I need to keep raising that point? I don't know. I've got to have the time over the decades, but I'm already, with 12 units, I'm already at 30,000 in a reserve and it's building every month. I don't think I'm going to stop. There may be a point where if I have, at 20 doors, because that's where I want to be, if I hit to 75,000, is that probably a spot where I could stop? I don't know because prices keep going up. I don't know. Do you maybe cut back a little bit, but always still putting a little bit in it? I haven't decided. I don't have the years of experience, but it's building because my repairs are slim to none. And I've got now 12 units.
Yeah, and with that, reserve pot, continuing to grow, like you said, whether you hit 50,000 or 75 or 100, like at some point, the money that you're going to be putting in there won't really be going to use because you're probably not going to have to pull it out from a reserve standpoint. But could that maybe trickle over into another bucket that's for down payments or future projects or, fund money? Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? I'm putting it in and everybody could kill me. I'm just being honest, as I think this is what everybody wants. I have chosen to put a portion in a money market account. I've split it. I've got about half of it in a money market account right now. It's paying, last I looked, it was with Capital One, 3.85 is what they're paying. I want to beat inflation. So I took the other half, and this is a somewhat risk. No, I had used to have a Series 7 license, Series 63 license. I was a stockbroker. years ago. I've always been in finance. So I looked at a very safe, high dividend stock that was local. I bought a energy stock, not the front end of drilling, but the ones that transport the energy. Lots safer and more stable. And I put it in an energy stock that pays a 9.2% dividend. So I looked at it as that way, and I'd looked at the history of the stock, and it's like, man, it is very stable. You're paying that kind of dividend, it's not going to go down much. And over the last 18 months, it's gone up, but I'm still getting a 9.2% dividend as opposed to 3.85. So I put a portion of it because I don't intend to tap all of it, though I could. I want to make at least a little bit of return even on those reserves. I don't know if that's the proper way. That's just what I'm doing with some of it.
Well, I think you probably have a point there to an extent. I mean, my philosophy on my reserve fund is probably similar. I have a handful of whole life policies, and I know there are people that talk about infinite banking and some of the other stuff, and
Yep.
that's certainly not for this conversation today, but that's kind of what I do. I essentially have it in a pot. It's growing, 5, 6%, whatever, and then it's always there that I can go pull it out. But I've kind of had the thought myself of like how much, do I need, and when is enough enough?
Yeah,
And
and that's what I
is
think
is that is that
everybody's having.
30,000?
The key to it
Yeah.
is you're building it up. If you're building it up, that's the ultimate goal. You should be always putting back. That enough is not a bad discussion. It doesn't harm you letting it build up. There's no wrong with having plenty of money. I want to go back to a question you had and then open up if you have any more. It says, at what point in
Sure.
the process do you get your bank started on the construction loan?
Mm,
Great
yes.
question. Um, I come from banking and I remember some of those things. Bankers are ultra conservative. No, they could lose their job over a bad loan. That's why they are protecting that money, and rightfully so, because it's not theirs. But I have seen bankers lose their job over writing a bad loan. It's that serious. And so they're mindful of that. They're risk averse. So what I typically do is I go to now I've got three banks because you know that old commercial, when banks compete, you win. I firmly believe that. And I work with local banks, not the big national ones. I'm working with a local and maybe one that's more of a regional type. And I'm going to them saying, hey, here's my projects next year. I've already sat down with them and said, hey, here's what I'm looking at, not in 25, in 26. What do you think? I get to hear from them what their underwriting guidelines will be. I'm getting to hear their taste for the loan. You're seeing, where do I need to go somewhere else because I can tell that they're not that interested. I'm giving them a good year out, throwing the idea out, saying, here's what I'm looking at. What's your thoughts? What's your are you able to do on the construction? Hearing from all three of them ahead of time. And then when I'm in the process of looking for the lots, I've already talked to them. And then when I'm nailing down that lot, I'm nailing down the construction terms, and I'm telling them up front, hey, I'm going to, and I tell them which bank. Hey, I'm going to what I use, and I'll just use, I'm going to Grandview Bank. I'm talking to First Financial, and I'm talking to Pinnacle Bank. I want to see who's going to give me the best opportunity, and I'm checking. And I learned that from another big investor that is one of my mentors. When I was at the bank, he was doing it against me. So I remember these things, and it makes you get tighter on the rate, and you're giving a better offer. Hey, can I get the latest ones, and I'll give some structure to them. I had a bank getting too tight, and I told her straight to her, straight to her face. I said, "Y'all are too tight. I'm getting better terms." They were wanting to offer me 80% of construction cost. Well, that's a lot different. I had another one offering me 80% of 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 appraisal. Well, then that's a lot different. I'm getting 100% of my construction covered. I had another one. that gave me 85% of appraisal. So I'm
Hmm.
talking to those. So you're having them compete. And I did one with the 80% of appraisal and one the other house, because I'm building two right now, one with 85% of appraisal. And I told them, I said, you understand, I'm probably not going to use all this loan. If I use all this loan, I've failed in my build because I have my builds dialed down so much. I just told them, I said, I appreciate the loan and do it at that amount, but I don't intend to use all of that because I want to be a little more higher loan to value. I'm shooting for 70% or less from the starting point and having a higher, if you say the average is in that 200 to $300 per door is what people want to start at, I'm trying to start at 400 to 500 so that I can get to financial freedom a little earlier because I have a time horizon of about 4 years from now. So I'm wanting to start at a little bit better position and putting that 30,000 down versus putting eight.
Sure. Yeah. So, quick follow-up question. At what point will some of those banks, when you're talking with them, will they issue, what I'm going to effectively call a term sheet, something where they're actually giving you, that 80 or 85%, rate and things like that?
They're usually giving me an idea from the day we talk, but where we nail it down is within when I'm out looking for the lots, I'm getting those term sheets. And usually, right when I'm closing on, because I'm buying the lot with cash, that's my part of the cash up front. And then I'm sitting down and getting it all nailed down right at those time frames. But I already generally know 98% of the terms before then. And I'll even go back to a bank and say, well, you're charging me a 1% origination. This bank over here is charging me a half a point. Can you match that? I like your term on your rate. You're at prime, it's 8% or 8.5 back then. If you'll do it at a half point origination, I'll go with you. So you're going back and forth. It's a negotiation as if you were buying the property. It's a negotiation on terms.
Yeah, that's great. Because you're essentially, like you said earlier, kind of pitting them against themselves, but you're really going for the best rate in terms that work for you. That's going to help you not have to pull, $10,000 beyond the lot, into
Right.
the deal, just to be able to get it closed, so you can even get your construction loan there.
And I'll tell you, one of the bankers told me, and I've shared this several times in discussions and in videos. One of the banks that actually gives me the very best terms. So I'm going his route. He said they look at the personal financial statement is one of, if not the primary thing that they're looking at. And they're wanting to see how much reserves I have. And that's what he told me directly. Best practice, if you go back when I was in banking and the things that we learned in banking schools, best practices in your net worth. Your net worth should have about 10% minimum is what they're looking for as best practice, 10% of your net worth in cash or equivalents. I'm not there yet. My net worth has been growing, but I calculate it. And so right now I'm at the 8% and I'm trying to grow that, get back to the 10. um, but that's what he said he looks at. He liked my loan, didn't even worry. Yes, they did pull credit, but he says I wasn't as concerned. People that pay attention to this are going to have good credit. He said, I looked at your reserves and you've got reserves that could cover months of vacancy on your properties and you would be fine. He says, I wasn't worried at all. This was an easy deal to present to the loan committee, and I'm going to continue to build out some with him, most likely. But that's what I would say is get that banking relationship, pit them against each other, have them fight for it, and you can still negotiate a little bit. But that's some advice that that banker gave me is they look heavily at the personal financial statement.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really good. And I think having a good personal financial statement helps, like having something that's maybe pre-packaged so that, when you are going to those people, you can, whether that's dropping them off a physical copy or emailing something ahead of time. That's what I'm working on. One of my goals for Q1 is to really build out the personal financial statement for me. I've done a partial one in the past, but just actually putting it on paper. So I like
And
that you
I would
mentioned
say
that.
make sure it's accurate. When I was in banking, we could tell when somebody fluffed it up. You don't want to be that. You want to be accurate because you're really, if it's a tool, you're going to look at it year over year and say, how am I making progress? Here's the things I need to work on. So it's really for you not to be accurate so that you're not fooling yourself, saying this is real value on everything I have. If I were to sell it, this is the market value on the real estate. This is my actual cash. Do it the same way every year. I would recommend that. That's why I do mine on December 31st. I print the bank statements on December 31st every year. Whatever's in there, that's the number I put in. And I do that every year. That's from my accounting background. I worked for an accountant when I was really young, but I have that. And then you're right, you're sending a package to the bank. I typically hand them because I know they're going to need at least last year's tax return. Usually it's three when you're getting started with a bank. Sometimes they'll do two. I send them my personal financial statement, my tax returns, then I also send them my underwriting of the project and say, here's what it's going to cost me on this project. Here's the value. And they trust me because they know I come from real estate. So I've gained some trust with them. I say, this is where the market is. This is what I'm going to build it for. This is what it's going to appraise pretty close to or right there. Here's what I should be getting in rents. I give them the spreadsheet of the underwriting of the project because I'm basically doing their work for them. Because if not, they're going to do it. And what if they put wrong information in there and it doesn't look as good as you know it is? I'm sending them my data and saying, this is the project. This is why I'm doing it. I wouldn't do it if this doesn't cash flow. And I'm sitting down with them and going through it and handing them the package. And it's tended to go smoother versus if you came to a banker and say you've never met them and you go in and say, hey, I want to build a house. Can you give me a loan? On that side, it's a relationship business. I still believe it. It's a relationship business. They're saying, do I trust this person? You want them to get to know you.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that.
And
Yeah,
that's I strongly believe that.
you definitely want to be able to build that relationship with them, because your foundation, that you're laying up front, when you're presenting a factual, personal financial statement, when you're submitting those 2 to 3 years of tax returns and, walking through your deals. Like in a conversation last week, I had somebody ask, hey, can you go detail me, your last three successful deals? And oh, can you send pictures too? And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. They
Huh,
want to actually see pictures, not just, numbers and stuff. So yeah, but it's all about that relationship.
it is. What other question would you have?
So when you were talking about those reserves, you're talking about, starting to pay some of those costs 8 years in, or, setting aside money every month. One thing that's come into conversations I've had recently with the builder I'm going to be working with is the builder's warranty. I know typically, not always, but a lot of times builders will warranty 100% of their work for a year. You
Yep.
typically get some sort of manufacturer warranty on appliances or mechanical systems, so HVAC, water heaters, things like that. But what are you typically seeing as a warranty or builder's warranty, things that are helping to lower your risk from a repair standpoint?
Well, that is one of them. The first year, everything's under warranty. Anything that fails in the build, it's almost like when you buy a car, you have that, was it what it used to be, 3 years, 36,000 miles, full, no questions asked. You get that. And I would say look for that. That is a big part of the conversation when you're talking to a builder. I'm telling the story of a person that did a recent duplex that we managed the property. They did not get any warranty whatsoever, and it is multiple issues failing, and they're having to cover these costs because they didn't pick a good builder that would do a warranty. So that is, you're right. You're having the right conversations, a builder that stands behind their work. I look at it as if you're not going to give me a warranty, I don't trust your work. That tells me you don't have confidence in your work, right?
Right.
And so if the industry standard is 1 year, I've actually known a couple that are 2 years in. I have another builder. Now this is for our beach house that's a short-term rental. I 3 years later had a situation. Now it was huge. It wasn't a big hit situation. He still warranted it 3 years later. He says that shouldn't have happened. We're just going to get it fixed. It's the quality of the builder. The other thing that you have out there, a lot of times these foundations have a 10-year warranty. You want to ask
Hmm.
about their foundation warranty. Here in Texas, it's required as a builder to provide a 10-year warranty on the foundation. That's according, now I'm taking the word of my builder, but he says that is what it is required in the state of Texas.
Hmm. I wonder why that is. I wonder why more states don't adopt a similar policy.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And we always do an engineered foundation every time. It's a little bit of cost to have that engineer look at the loads and how to build it out. Ours so far, none of them have been piers. We've done what these beams where they're digging their, 2 foot deep trenches, making boxes. If you take the foundation and each box might be about a 10 foot by 10 foot size with big 2 foot trenches in between that create the firmer beams in between. And then they're also putting um, cabling through it on 2 sides so that if you needed to, if something were to fail, they can pull that cable and cinch back up the foundation. I've been told it can only be done once, but I heard somebody else, another contractor of mine recently said, no, he knows of a company that can re-sleeve the cables and do it more than once. But that's just some of the things that we do on the foundations here. The one, our house though is built on, uh, piers. It just depends on the property.
Yeah.
You want to get
Well,
soil tests.
yeah, that is a good one. Yeah, soil tests are very important. Here in South Carolina, you typically have a lot of septic, and we actually just did a soil test on a lot last week that failed. So we're having to look at an engineered system for it. So anyway, that's a whole nother conversation.
It's
But
think of the principle, and I know we're talking a lot of things on construction and finance. Now I'm going to go to back to my spiritual background. In the Bible, it says a house built on the sand will collapse. A house built on the rock is a firm foundation. And I believe in that. I want to spend the time on a firm foundation. I intend to keep these for decades. I don't want to skimp or compromise the process. If the foundation isn't built right, the rest of the house is not right. I want to get the soil sample. I want to get the engineered approval on how we do the foundation. I want to get it done right. It makes the process a little slower, but it builds a good firm foundation, and I know I've built a good house going forward.
hmm, yeah, that's great principle. It's very smart, from a logical, financial standpoint as well. Just seeing what properties could cost, in foundation issues, it's like you might as well build it right from the beginning. That way, hopefully you never ever have to touch it again.
And I've seen examples, maybe you have too. I've seen examples where people have compromised the process, and I've watched the house have multiple issues, and not just one house. I've seen this on occasion, the people that compromise the process.
Yeah, I don't know that I've run into that necessarily. I did have a buddy who's building in town, and he had something where he built most of the foundation, and the inspector came back and failed him for something. Now I don't know if he was trying to cut some corners, or not. But yeah, it's very important to build it right, because I'm just like you, Brandon. I want to own my assets for a long time, potentially pass those down to the next generation. And, it's like, okay, well, if you're going to do that, then you need to be really confident in your process and knowing, that you're doing things the right way. Even paying a little bit more money to go above and beyond. If it's
Yes.
going to cost you $1,000 and you can ensure, the longevity of your asset or product, 10, 15 years, you might as well pay the extra thousand and it'll be cheaper up front.
Yes. Always is. What other question would you have?
Honestly, I feel like those are most of my questions. I mean, I'm ready to go out and build something.
It's I love it. And it's maybe it's just my personality that I can the effort that I put in, the builder's putting in, I've kind of calculated he's putting in about 300 hours. I'm putting in maybe 40 at most for the project. And so that's why I hire a builder. I look at my opportunity cost. I'm willing to pay him, but I like to look back and say, look, this is what I've built because this is going to stand for decades, and I'm just proud of doing it. I enjoy it. It doesn't even feel like work. I like being able to pick out the flooring, the colors of the house, the tile, the fixtures. You know, I watch HGTV and Magnolia Channel. I'm looking at where the market is going, and I like doing that because I grew up with that. My mother did some interior design when I was growing up for other people. I didn't think I was gleaning anything from it, but I look back and I think, man, I was learning and I use it today. I even think of certain things on proportionality, things that I would hear my family talk about. And even back then, they built a subdivision when I was a
Hmm.
teenager. It's a subdivision named after my mother out there in our community. And I was a part of, heck, I laid the sod around those little ponds. I'll never forget that summer. It about killed me.
Oh
But we
gosh.
built a subdivision. So we did, and my parents built every house that they've ever owned. So this is just what I've grown up with, and I've learned over the years, even when I was a teenager, learning how they built and the problems. And I remember some of that. And every build, even today, I still learn. My builder sent me something this weekend. I didn't even understand what he was talking about. I thought he was making a joke, and I called him. I'm like, does this really say what I think it says? And he's like, no, that's what it's called. And I was like, oh, okay. You know, you're going to continue to learn. And I love building. It is a fun. And Hunter, I hope you enjoy it like I do.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. Getting started here in the next couple months, so I'm ready to hit it full force, and I appreciate you just sharing wisdom and knowledge with me, because I know this is going to set me up years ahead.
Yeah. So we'll end there. And thanks for taking the time to be on this call. I think everybody will get a lot of things through this discussion that you brought up. What was it, a month or so ago? I remember where I was sitting when I was at one of my constructions when I was talking. I was like, man, your questions are good. Everybody needs to hear this.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, it's really just coming out of, similar to you, me just exploring, the whole build to rent model and just trying to pick it apart, seeing, okay, where is a potential risk or something that I need to be asking questions on that, I don't know. Because just like you, I'm learning every day and every week.
Yeah. I